2. So most of, well, it started to get back that unless you're in pretty good shape, don't even try going to any New York East Coast.
My grandfather jumped boat. He was a sailor. He jumped boat in San Francisco and ran down to LA.
Well, good for him.
He was supposed to go back.
Is that right?
He had to sign papers because he was a sailor on the ship.
Oh yeah, indenture.
He just wouldn't go back. He's hid out the whole time. He never had papers to live here.
Yeah. Well, as you probably know, a lot of the timbers that were used in the Comstock mines were from abandoned ships in San Francisco Harbor. They just sat there because they didn't have crews to go back out to sea, and they just kind of got rot.
Gold hunters.
That's right. And then guys with mule trains came down and literally took all the timbers and brought them all up and says we can use them. So a lot of ships just died right there in San Francisco Harbor. But getting back to Cork, they went to Canada mostly. So they went into the St. Lawrence River, and their objective was to try to get to the United States. So a lot of them, that's by the way where Henry Ford's family ended up. A lot of them ended up in places like Detroit, on the south side of the Great Lakes. And if they had a little money or if they had whatever, they would go further. So some of the great stories of opening up the West was through the St. Lawrence. Pardon?
Are you forgetting Niagara Falls?
No. And Buffalo.
Down to St. Lawrence and they go through Lake Ontario.
Yeah.
And then they go up the falls so they can go to Detroit. No, they go to Canada.
Huh?
They must have.
That's what I said.
St. Lawrence River.
Yeah.
I know the St. Lawrence because
You're from there. She's from Rochester, New York. So she knows that area. Okay, so how did they get to Quebec? You don't have to go over the Niagara Falls to get to Quebec, right? You stay north of the Lake Erie, and right?
Right, you have to.
Yes. Well, they did. So most of them wanted to go to Quebec, and that's why Gros Isle, which I was trying to think of earlier, not Grand Isle, Gros Isle, became the quarantine island, like the Ellis Island, if you like, for Quebec. But they headed for Quebec, and they fanned out from there. A lot of them literally jumped ship before Quebec, because, well, the captains would put them ashore. It was easier for a captain to get rid of him because he didn't have to fill out as many papers, and he didn't have to deal with as many inspections and what have you when he got to wherever he was going. He was already paid, so he didn't care. So if somebody wanted to get rowed ashore on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River and take his chances on heading off south, that's exactly what he would do, and a lot of them did exactly that. And it's interesting that on the southern shores of the Great Lakes there in Canadian, before you hit the border, there's a lot of farms. A lot of that area was all farmed by Irish people. If you take that strip between the parallel, if you like, the Canadian border and the St. Lawrence River, that was a favorite spot for them. And a lot of them went in there and I suppose just dug in. They just literally found a piece of ground, cleared it, started squatting on it, and what the heck, who's going to come and chase them away? So the history of that area is very, very interesting, and the history of northern Michigan is very interesting, and it's very interesting that a lot of the place names in northern Michigan are named after Irish counties, like this county Roscommon, and so on. So so they kind of colonized that northern Michigan. And if you look at the Michigan Peninsula that sticks right up there, and there was lots of room there for them, and they colonized it. And then if you look at the south end of it, and especially on the eastern side of it, what have you got there? That's where all the car manufacturers, that's where all of that stuff has taken place. And why was that? Because they fixed um, steam engines for boats. So that, and that became they developed the skills for fixing and working and metals and machine tooling and all that stuff.
Iron mines.
Correct. Yeah.
That way.
Yes. And of course they transport iron ore along the lakes and so on. But that became what it is today through the steam engines first, bicycles. They started to make bicycles, so anything mechanical. So it was by no means a coincidence or an accident that the first cars were made there. So that Henry Ford grew up there, and everybody was tinkering around with mechanics, with engines. So that they already had engines. So it was almost a certainty that it's just a natural place for the automobile to be born. But it was largely Irish. That's a lot of it is that is forgotten. It was largely Irish that developed that area, and you see a lot of them were skilled from Ireland. They came back because they had learned in mills. By the way, Cork itself had an awful lot of mills, and again you can tell that in any town in Ireland by the names of the street. There are several mill streets, so that you know that there's like Roach Mill Street, such a Mill Street, Church Mill Street, you know. So there's mills where, and again, it was because I was on a river, so that they would build a sluice around, build a mill, and start milling. And that was also part of the attraction from the Huguenots who came in large numbers from France, who were the Protestants, came in because they tended to have been mechanics and engineers who had brought milling skills with them and set up mills in and around Cork. So Cork was a great milling centre. And again, no doubt in the world that was transported back to British North America, Canada, and eventually worked its way down. See, most of them found south-flowing rivers, like the Ohio. So, when you think about it, it's not that far from the Canadian border to when you start picking up rivers that bring all the way down to the Mississippi. Now, the French, of course, already knew that. They'd already done all of that. So they were already going down from Quebec and from that area all the way down to New Orleans. So that the people from Acadia in France had come in, settled there first, and the people who we know now in Louisiana as the Cajuns were actually the Acadians who came down the rafts and the rivers all the way from Canada. Now, the French and the Irish would have been very friendly, and they would have got on extremely well in British North America. We're talking now, after the Revolution, when they drew the line, and when the United States was. But so in many ways, the Irish kind of felt I won't say at home, but they had certain advantages in that they were still under the Queen. They were still, if you like, on home territory in Canada. They hated it, but they were still part of they understood the system. It would have been the English coin, the Queen in his face, when they went across into America. Now that was new. That was new. Now you had the dollar and you had Lincoln, not in those days you wouldn't have Lincoln, but you'd have had Washington, you'd have had the icons that we're familiar with here. And that would have been very new to them. But they loved it because they were, they became instant Americans. But they tended to go into the center, into the middle, and that's why, of course, Illinois and Indiana and all of those were very strongly Irish. And it wasn't then until surprisingly enough, until the Erie Canal was built, that the Irish really started to come into New York. New York was not their first and favorite place, as everybody assumes it was. It really wasn't. It became so after the Erie Canal, because now there was a direct they could move. San Francisco had an Irish mayor 20 years before any city on the East Coast. People forget that. Even San Diego here had Irish sheriffs and mayors and tax collectors and
Well,
post office
My
managers.
mom was in LA when she grew up. Everybody was Irish there.
Yeah,
Big Royal Street, it's all Mexican now.
yeah, it is. Yeah,
She
yeah,
said everybody was. And they used to just get on the streetcar and go down. You go back past these different like ethnic neighborhoods.
yeah.
My mom's old enough to be my grandmother. My parents are older, and her father was 20 years older than her mother.
Yeah.
So he was, I think he was about 60 when he had her,
Uh-huh.
and he lived to be 110 or something. He was a real old guy.
Huh.
But I never got to meet him, but I heard all these stories about him. But they had all kinds of Irish people there.
Written down in LA, right in LA. Yeah. See, people forget that, huh?